Welcome to the Tree of Life, Interconnecting Religions, Artistic Traditions, and Scientific Knowledge. This is the second day of a conference at the University of Connecticut aimed at promoting interdisciplinary and interfaith dialogue on the theme of the Tree of Life. The conference is part of a larger project called the Abrahamic Story of the Tree, supported by the University of Connecticut's Abrahamic programs, which fosters intercultural engagement, especially around issues of historical and contemporary importance to the Abrahamic religions. This conference brings together speakers with a wide range of expertise in Judaic studies, Mediterranean studies, medieval European art history, Islamic art history, Indonesian culture, early modern art history, landscape architecture, and evolutionary biology. While some of our speakers are here at the University of Connecticut, others are joining us virtually, including our first speaker today from Israel. Our first speaker today from Turkey, and then our second speaker from Indonesia. The format of the conference is designed to promote dialogue. Each talk will be about 45 minutes, leaving around 15 minutes for discussion. We encourage questions from those who are here in the conference room and those who are joining us virtually. We ask that if you are joining us in the Zoom webinar, and if you would like to ask a question, to type it into chat, and we will collect it and ask it when the talk is done. I would especially like to thank Matthew Larson, Kinga Karlaska, and Alexis Boylan for their help in coordinating this event. Funding for the conference was generously provided by the University of Connecticut's Office of Global Affairs and the Yukon Humanities Institute. And I would also like to thank all of our speakers who have taken their time to share their expertise with us. I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker for the day, who is Christiane Gruber. Christiane Gruber is professor of Islamic art and former chair of the History of Art Department at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, as well as founding director of Kamsin, Islamic Art History Online. Her scholarly work explores medieval to contemporary Islamic art, especially figural representation, depictions of the Prophet Muhammad, manuscripts and book arts, architecture, and modern visual and material cultures. Her two most recent publications include The Praiseworthy One, The Prophet Muhammad in Islamic Texts and Images, and The Image Debate, Figural Representation in Islam and Across the World. And her public-facing essays have appeared in Newsweek, The Conversation, New Lines Magazine, and Prospect Magazine, among others. She is currently on sabbatical leave in Turkey, undertaking field research and writing her next book entitled Elements of the Middle East, Art, Faith, and Ecology. And today she will be speaking on the tree as an animalesque plant, Nabat Hayawani, Arboreal Thoughtscapes in Muslim majority lands over the centuries.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Can you see me and hear me without a problem?
Yes, we got it.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine, for inviting me to participate in this conference, and also to all the speakers. I really enjoyed the papers yesterday. I learned a lot, and I'm sure I'll learn much more over the course of today. I'm especially pleased to participate because I've never presented on trees before. So this is really the first draft of what is the core of a chapter on trees for my forthcoming book. Since it's work in progress, I would be very grateful for any questions or comments at the end of my talk. So without any further ado, let me hop into the tree as an animalesque plant, or Nabat Hayawani. The Egyptian scholar al-Makrizi is a famous historian, biographer, and topographer of the medieval Islamic world. Among his lesser studied works, however, can be counted a short treatise on ant minerals, in which he discusses the earth, air, fire, and water, as well as mountains, birds, and trees. Within the latter category, the date palm tree, or nakhla in Arabic, takes pride of place as the most important arboreal exemplar, since it recalls both human and non-human animals. Synthesizing the insights of previous scholars, above all al-Qazvini and the Ikhwan al-Safa, al-Makrizi relates that, quote, and here's on the screen, if you cut off the head of the date palm, it dries up and stops growing, just like cutting off the necks of animals. And from this comparative observation, the date palm is evidently an animalesque plant, or Nabat Hayawani. Al-Makrizi then goes on to state that if the palm date tree is decapitated, then it dries out and dies, and therefore it is, quote, a plant in body, but an animal in soul. Nabati fil jism, hayawani fil nafs, end quote. In these and other texts written in the Islamic world over the centuries, the date palm tree breaches through vegetal and animal taxonomies, yielding new ways to explore the questions of growth, efflorescence, and decay among various life forms. This type of plant thinking, to borrow the expression coined by Michael Marder in his book on the philosophy of vegetal life, is not new or unprecedented. From Plato onward, the tree stands tall as a monumental plant whose growth is based on a vertical axis. As Marder argues, quote, in nature, the tree alone is vertical, along with man, end quote. And indeed, the tree, that most organic column of living matter, is often likened to a human standing erect. This phytoanthropocentric analogy hints at a shared essence for earthly entities rooted in the soil and endowed with life. Thinking about, with, and through trees is a staple of all world cultures and religions, about which we've heard quite a bit already in this conference. Beyond Western philosophy, arboreal thoughtscapes have long circulated within Islamic lands among both Muslim and non-Muslim communities. The tree, or shajara in Arabic, has functioned as a metaphor for the upright human of upright morals above all, a cognitive pattern detectable in the Quran's rhetorical question to the Muslim faithful, asking, quote, have you not seen how God presents an example, a methal, that a good word, or kalima tayyiba, is like a good tree, or shajara tayyiba. Its root is firm and its branches reach the sky, end quote. This analogy, or methal in Arabic, tethers human and tree, not just through their shared vertical axis of growth, but also via the ethical notion that goodness is a sturdy act of implantation that elevates both being and spirit heavenward. Moreover, as al-Makrizi and other Muslim writers stress, the date palm is to be considered the most animalesque of trees. The adjective hayawani, also defined linguistically as pertaining to a living creature or endowed with life, al-haya, so life. The reasons for this life form and embodied epithet are twofold. On the one hand, like grass and flowering plants, palm trees are monocots whose hearts are located at the very top of this single root system. Should they be sliced off, then they quickly die, just like decapitated animals and humans. On the other hand, palm trees are dioecious, that is, they include separate and distinct male and female sexes, in which the male tree acts as a pollinator of the female fruit bearer. Notwithstanding the wide spectrum of sexuality, this gendered binary parallels the traditional classificatory system of human beings, along with the active and passive reproductive roles that have been traditionally assigned to them. These few prefatory thoughts help agitate questions and set the stage for an examination of the broader landscape of conceptual thinking about trees in Muslim-majority lands across the centuries. While many topics could be broached, in my talk today, I wish to more upon three key themes. First, the appearance and function of trees in the Quran, a topic that helps track an Islamic arboreal imagination of the numinous and eschatological realms, or what I call God's botanical cosmos. Second, the case study of the holy oasis of Medina, which I argue should be conceptualized as the Prophet Muhammad's palm city. And third, how trees, as ecologically indigenous, yet endangered living organisms, function not as centerpieces for religious beliefs, especially as they are anchored in tombs, but also as arboreal parables for the various communities of the Middle East whose natural environments and traditional lifestyles are increasingly at risk today. This thematic triad will root my exploration in Islam's holy scripture, the pre-modern visual arts, and on the ground today, a cross-disciplinary and diachronic approach inspired by this conference's focus on the interconnectivities of trees across multiple fields of thought and practice. So now let's head into God's botanical cosmos to explore Quranic trees. The Quran makes frequent mention of trees, above all the fig, olive, and date palm, whose fruits provide quote-unquote wholesome sustenance or rizq hasan in the Quran. They also provide natural cures against various ills. While figs can remove kidney stones and relieve intestinal pain, olives help with tuberculosis, measles, eczema, and the common cold. For its part, the palm tree, which is mentioned over 20 times in the Quran, bears dates, long praised as a panacea against heart and skin diseases, an antidote to diarrhea and poison, a wound healer, an aid against liver disorders and labor pains, and a quick fix for sexual weakness. The olive tree is especially revered, as is clear from its sacred appellation, sacred olive tree, or Shajara Mubaraka Zaytuna, in the Quran's so-called verse of light, or Ayat an-Nur, which we heard about a little bit yesterday. In this verse, which is often inscribed on mosque domes and lamps, God is described as a light of the heavens and earth that is contained within a lamp lit from the oil of the blessed olive tree, thus guiding his followers by striking exemplars, or amthal, yet again. Here and elsewhere, the olive tree, its fruit and oil, offer arboreal analogies for divine enlightenment within an Islamic religious imagination that is clearly indebted to a regionally specific and highly prized fruit-bearing crop. Besides the olive tree, the date palm tree makes an important appearance in the Quranic narrative of Mary, or Maryam, giving birth to Jesus, Isa in Arabic. Several verses describe the extreme labor pains that drove her to a date palm tree, where God ordered her to shake the trunk to reap its fresh and ripe dates. Mary's childbirth cramps are thus alleviated, a medicinal benefit confirmed by several recent studies of women who, after having eaten dates during their late pregnancy, experienced increased cervical dilation, as well as shorter and less painful labor. As Masume Kordi and other Iranian midwives have also shown, dates affect oxytocin receptors and make uterine muscles respond better to oxytocin, resulting in more effective uterine contractions. From the Quran to nursing and medicine, the date is praised as a homeopathic cure for women while giving birth, its fruit-bearing tree serving as a progenitor pain reductor in the ongoing cycle of human life, including in the story of Mary herself. Besides enlightening olive trees and salutary palm dates, the Quran also makes mention of 4 named trees with cosmic attributes. The first is the so-called khuld tree, the term khuld meaning immortality or eternity. In the Quran, the khuld tree is located in paradise, and its fruits are forbidden to Adam and Eve, who nevertheless are tempted by the snake-like Satan into their consumption and thus into shame of their own nudity. A symbol of humankind's disobedience of God and its fall to earth, the Quranic khuld tree echoes the tree of knowledge of good and evil in Judaism and Christianity, though in the latter case, it is divested of the Christian concept of original sin. Coming together to form a quartet with man, woman, and serpentine devil, the tree acts as the 4th major protagonist in the Abrahamic tales of the fall and suffering of God's human creation. On the other side of the cosmic spectrum is the Zakum tree, a cursed tree or shaja mal'una that the Quran mentions in several verses as growing from the depths or the roots of hell. It is set to act as a test, trial, or punishment for the sinful and oppressors who are forced to eat its fruits that resemble devil's heads or ru'us ash-shayateen. Once eaten, the tree's putrid fruits boil in the bellies of the damned as if molten metal or boiling water. These vivid details led medieval manuscript painters, including those tasked with illustrating the narrative of the Prophet Muhammad's celestial ascension, as you can see here on the screen, to depict the Zakum planted in the blaze of hell, sprouting spear-like thorns and beast-shaped fruits, while the damned are tortured by fiery-fleshed demons. And here you'll see that these particular damned have their tongues sliced by swords, and this is usually a torture reserved for hypocrites and backbiters because their tongues were flippant. These fantastic details, it may seem to us today, are the stuff of pre-modern myth and fantasy. And yet the Zakum tree found in the Muslim chthonic imaginary may well telescope the botanical realities of the Arabian Peninsula during the 7th century, at which time Islam emerged as a new conceptual order structuring both the here and hereafter. In such a geotemporal context, it is possible that real trees, flowers, and fruits in Arabia lent themselves to this horticultural concoction. One of these is the acacia tree or shrub, the word acacia coming from the Greek akis, meaning thorn, and it's the same word in Arabic, asant. The acacia has long, sharp thorns that appear as if sparring against would-be assailants, as you can see here in this acacia tree photo on the right. Beyond the motif of the bludgeon tree, it is possible that snapdragon flowers influence the description of the Zakum's fruits as if devil's heads. Indeed, in its dried state, the dragonflower, which you see right here, technically known as anterinum or calf snout in Latin, and it's the same word in Arabic, anfal ajal, appears as if a morbid skull. This macabre look is not only apropos for the pits of human perdition, but also substantiates torment as a tree, deformed, sharp, and snarling. Rising back up towards the heavens, the Quran's third major cosmic tree is the so-called lot tree of the furthest limit, or Sidrat al-Muntaha. 2 verses mention this enormous lot or jujube tree in the heavens. In one instance, it is witnessed by the Prophet Muhammad during his visit to paradise on the night of his celestial ascension, and in another, it is described as a tree spreading shade, or dhil mamdud, in the garden of eternal dwelling, that is paradise. Much like the Zakum, this heavenly tree of extended size and umbrage inspired Muslim artists who included it in paintings of the Prophet's celestial ascension. In one such depiction made in India around 1800, the Sidra tree provides the arboreal spine of the 7th or uppermost heaven that is located below the top strata of the cosmos, where God's throne, which you see right here, and his pedestal are located in a zone of illocality that's identified as la mekan, meaning no place or placelessness. So it's beyond all possible places. And here is the Sidra tree. The trunk of the Sidra tree here contains canopied pavilions, while its drooping branches include birds, angels offering gems, turbans, and luxurious fabrics for the paradise dwellers to enjoy under its all-encompassing awning of foliage. So the entirety of the heavens here is structured around this massive sidra tree. Within Islamic textual sources, the earthly and heavenly sidra or jujube trees intermix. The shade of the earthly exemplar is praised in the hadith or the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, along with its leaves, which the Prophet used to comb and strengthen his hair, and which he recommended mixed in with water to wash the deceased before their shrouding and burial. While discussing proper behavior or adab, Muhammad is also recorded as having prohibited cutting sidra trees because they provide shade under which travelers and beasts seek shelter. Shuttling back to the heavenly jujube tree, the Prophet describes Sidrat al-Muntaha as so vast that, quote, a rider here will travel in the shade of one of its branches for 100 years, end quote. So its branches are so big that it takes 100 years for a rider to reach the limit. Still today, the prized sidra tree provides ample shades for animals, travelers, and picnickers in the Arabian Peninsula, stretching from Oman to Doha, where today it functions as the national tree of Qatar. This brings us to the fourth and last cosmic tree mentioned in the Quran, namely the Tuba tree. Its scriptural genesis, however, is quite vague, as it is mentioned only once in the Quran, in a verse that promises that those who believe in Islam and do good are promised bliss, or tuba, at their life journey's end. While the concept of bliss or tuba is not allegorized to a tree within the Quran, it takes on an arboreal shape in other texts, where tuba is described as a gigantic upside-down tree with roots up in the air and branches drooping down from the heavens. The tuba tree is depicted in a similar fashion within Islamic paintings and diagrams as well, including in illustrated manuscripts of cosmological texts such as Ismail Haqq's Ma'rifatnameh or Book of Gnosis, which you see here on the screen. In this 1818 copy, a double-page depiction includes diagrammatic renditions of both paradise and hell at the top and bottom of the manuscript's folio, respectively. So hell is down here, heaven is up here, and the cosmic Kaaba is in the center. While hell here is shown as a multi-tiered pit with the Zakum tree in its middle, paradise, and we'll zoom in, is a multicolored pyramid whose 8 gardens or heavens are sheltered under the golden tuba tree's dangling branches and leaves. So here, the tuba tree grows out of this circle and dangles downward, and it's identified as tuba or shajareye tuba in Ottoman Turkish. The gates to paradise are shown in the lower horizontal axis right here, while other eschatological objects belonging to God and the Prophet are also depicted and identified, and I won't go into these details now. Intriguingly, the cosmic maps and some other copies of the Ma'rifatnameh conjoin both the Tuba and Sidrat al-Muntaha trees. As this 1774 example shows, both heavenly trees were closely connected and even confused for one another, since taken as an arboreal duo, they embodied a faraway abode of unending comfort and beatitude. So here, the Sidrat al-Muntaha and Tuba are confused almost as if they're just one tree. These and other Quranic trees thus eco-materialize major theological concepts, ranging from knowledge of the divine, or khuld, to the nature and quality of hell's torture, that is zakum, to the spreading shade of paradise, the Sidrat al-Muntaha, in which eternal bliss, or tuba, awaits the Muslim faithful who performed good deeds and followed the straight path. In Islamic devotional thought, the tuba and Sidrat al-Muntaha trees were not only conjoined as cosmic trees associated with paradise, but also as a metaphor for Muhammad's prophetic qualities and capabilities in both divine and earthly realms. For example, many Ottoman prayer books made in the 18th century include illustrations of these trees, as can be seen here in a 1798 manuscript folio showing the 8 gardens of paradise as a golden grid. So here are the 8 paradises, and here's a detail of all of their names, below which a multi-hued upside-down tree runs parallel to a date palm tree. So here's our upside-down tree, and here's our date palm tree. If we flip this folio and zoom in on the Ottoman inscriptions, they reveal a poetic verse likening the Prophet Muhammad's stature to Tuba and even as big as Muntaha. Here, both celestial trees promote Muhammad as a messenger of meta-human proportions, that is, as a cosmic arboreal apostle. Beyond such a spiritualized view of the prophetic corpus, which is typical of the Ottoman Sunni Sufi milieu in which these prayer books were made, there is also a reference to Muhammad's palm tree, which you see right here, which the inscription notes that he planted with his own blessed hand, after which the tree yielded dates, thus constituting one of the Prophet's most evident miracles. Muhammad's date-giving tree, which is identified here as Hurma veren darakht, or date-giving tree, leads us from the skies back to earth to journey onward to our second theme, namely the holy city of Medina. Located in the Hijaz Strip north of Mecca, Medina is the second holiest city in Islam. While Mecca is considered the abode of God on earthly terrain, Medina is the city of the Prophet, or Medinat an-Nabi. Muhammad fled from Mecca to Medina in 622, establishing his community of believers around not just a faith, but within a protected palm tree oasis city known as Yathrib before his arrival. As Harry Munt has shown, the Prophet's Medina, his city, was not only a natural oasis, but it also was declared by Muhammad to be a haram, the latter term meaning protected enclave or sacred enclosure containing shrines. In Arabia, harams functioned as inviolable spaces, first for the worship of pagan deities, and later, after the advent of Islam, to honor one single all-encompassing God. During the Islamic period, harams were governed by rules and restrictions, above all the prohibition on killing humans, the prohibition on the presence of idolaters, the banning of hunting animals, and the ban on cutting down of plants and trees. Muhammad himself is recorded by al-Bukhari in his hadith chapter on the virtues of Medina as having stated that, quote, Medina is a sanctuary, is a haram, from that place to that. Its trees should not be cut, end quote. From its very onset as a Muslim city, Medina therefore functioned essentially as a green haram, as a green sanctuary. While many of its trees have long been cut down to make way for urban development, Medina's close association with the date palm has nevertheless held throughout the centuries. Still today, its famous dates, known as al-ajwa, are sold to pilgrims, their medicinal and anti-toxic qualities already lauded by the Prophet in the 7th century. Even more famous, however, is the date palm tree, or several date palm trees actually, located inside the courtyard of the Prophet's mosque complex, which after his death also included a tomb over his inhumed body, which further sacralized Medina's soil. From the 1600s onward, illustrated pilgrimage texts and poems, especially Muhyiddin Lari's popular Persian language Futuh al-Haramain, or description of the two holy places of Mecca and Medina, illustrate the Haram Nebewi of Medina, so the Prophet's complex of Medina. This complex includes a number of notable features, including its outer enclosure, which you see right here in this drawing, the Prophet's minbar, so his pulpit for sermons, and his tomb, which you see right here in gold. They also showed the mosque's open-air courtyard, which can be seen right here. And let's zoom into the courtyard, whose most central feature is often one or several date palm trees. Typically identified with the inscription Nakhl or Nakhla, which means date palm, the courtyard's linchpin is in fact an arboreal patch, greening the sacred space. Hadith transmitters and biographers mention that Muhammad had leaned against a palm tree while delivering sermons before he built the mosque and constructed a minbar. Thereafter, the distraught palm tree moaned like a camel and wept profusely out of grief. So according to one hadith, the Prophet transplanted it into the newly built mosque's courtyard. In illustrations such as these, then, the palm tree serves as an arboreal reminder, even a relic of sorts, of Muhammad's early imamhood during the Muslim community's beginnings and growth in the oasis city that was Medina. Additionally, many pilgrimage manuals were produced from the 17th century onward, at which time Ottoman custodianship of Mecca and Medina propelled increased interest in the sacred sites and their artistic representation. Among them, one compendium of texts made in 1707 includes a lavishly detailed representation of the Haramain, so of Mecca on the right and the Kaaba, and Medina here on the left. Here, the Kaaba and its sacred enclosure are depicted on the right, and the Prophet's mosque and tomb complex is located on the left, and let's zoom in. Looking closely at the Medina painting, the visual depictions and inscribed labels reveal a keen attentiveness not only to the haram's architectural features and furnishings, but also its palm date trees. Along the outer perimeter of the enclosure, and zooming in right here, in fact, a row of palm trees with dangling ripened dates are identified with the Ottoman label that reads Hurma ağaçları, which means palm date trees. While the Prophet's own date palm in the mosque courtyard, which you see right here, and here's the detail, is marked similarly, but in the singular, hurma ağaçı in Ottoman Turkish, so date palm tree. That the date palm trees are given such exacting attention not only stresses the character of Medina as a palm oasis, but also the sacrality of the Prophet's complex as indebted to its ecological roots. The Ottoman writer and traveler Evliya Çelebi, who died in 1682, wrote extensively about his visit to Medina, especially his visit to the Prophet's mosque complex. Of the date palm tree in the Haram's courtyard, he states that, quote, and here I've transcribed the whole quote, that a small square terrace or sufacık surrounded, it was located on a small square terrace or sufacık surrounded by a railing. Here there is a date palm tree that reaches the sky. The Prophet planted it with his own blessed hands. Next to it, by God's will, a sapling date palm is sprouting, so a hurma fidanı, so a sapling, end quote. Interestingly, illustrations of the palm tree included in Ottoman prayer books, like the 1798 painting that we saw earlier, right here, reiterate more or less verbatim Evliya Çelebi's description, strongly suggesting that the Medina mosque courtyard included this arboreal relic along with a sapling within an elevated and railed off reliquary of sorts. Within the sacred enclosure, the date palm tree was likely the center of devotional visitation as an organic memento to Muhammad and his miracles, something made even more evident from other manuscript illustrations that depict trees identified as dating, quote unquote, from the time of the Prophet. So the fact that it dated from the time of the Prophet gave it kind of a relic, a prophetic relic-like quality. And here is another depiction of a tree that's simply identified in Persian as darakht ke az zamane hazrat, or a tree from the time of the prophet. So that suffices as a prophetic relic. This vital materialism, to borrow Jane Bennett's expression, cuts across human and vegetal categories, and it endures throughout time. In the case of the Medina palm tree, it also carries prophetic presence and barakah, or blessing, the latter encompassing the energetic and life-sustaining aura of nature as conceptualized and practiced within Islam. Muhammad's trees, especially his miraculous date palm tree in the Medina mosque complex, still thrived well into the 20th century, as attested to by printed images and photographs. For example, a 1907 photograph by Mirza and Sons captures a view of the Haram with trees planted in its courtyard. So here is the Prophet Muhammad's tomb and mosque complex, here's the courtyard, and here is that arboreal patch within the Haram. Similarly, pilgrimage certificates, such as this one that was printed in 1920, include depictions of Hajj visitation sites, among them Mecca, right here, and Medina in the leftmost frame. Zooming in here on Medina, we can see that in this depiction, there is a courtyard that is largely overtaken by a depiction, which is right here. The entirety of the courtyard is overtaken by this depiction that is labeled the Sacred Complex's Garden, or Bustan al-Haram. So Bustan al-Haram, meaning the courtyard garden. So the courtyard is actually identified as a garden. In addition, a raised and railed off planter includes several palm trees that are identified as such in the captions. So if you read Arabic, you'll see Nakhl or Nakhlat al-Haram. So palm trees or palm trees of the complex are written right here in this planter, while a tree of light, or Shajarat Kanadil, right here, stands in the lower right corner. And at this time, in fact, much of the complex was lit through these trees, these large candle trees known as Shajarat Kanadil. So even the lighting is referred to as a tree. More simply put, Muhammad's mosque complex acted in part as a green conservatory, maintaining and illuminating the tree miracles and arboreal vestiges of the Prophet through time. This religio-architectural practice bespeaks of what Mangunjaya calls Islam's protective stance, as it intersects with the notion of the preserved sacred garden or grove. This eco-religious preservation, however, has been seriously threatened by urban growth and development across the Islamic world over the past century. While Mecca's Kaaba is now dwarfed by encircling high-rises, the interior courtyard and exterior perimeter of Medina's Haram has been cleared of its trees. Today, millions of pilgrims make their way every year to this holy site sacralized by Muhammad's buried body, the Arabian sun often beating down relentlessly upon pious visitors. To provide a shaded area of waiting, rest, and prayer, 250 canopies made of fabric absorbent of ultraviolet light were constructed by the order of Saudi Arabia's then King Abdullah ibn Abdulaziz in 2010. These shade providers, or midhallat in Arabic, recall the primordial fan-like shape, as well as the many purposes of palm trees in oasis cultures from the earliest times to today, namely to act as natural parasols against the beating rays of the desert sun. With the clearing of Medina's trees over the past century, thus came the concurrent drive to compensate for the loss of much needed shade, a technological antidote that not only undercuts the sacred site's palm oasis context, but also its endemic Islamic sacrality as closely intertwined with the Prophet's palm tree. And that is not all. With the clearing of the Haram's Bustan, its garden, came the loss of a mosque arbor for the local bird community as well. 20th century black and white photographs of the courtyard not only record the sacred palm grove enclosed by a railing, which you see right here in the corner, but also large flocks of birds and the humans feeding them. So here are the birds, here they are as well. And in fact, there was a position of pigeon feeder at the time in the mosque complex. While pigeons can still be found on the outskirts of the complex, the haram's interior has been largely purged of its non-human animal life, the modern concepts of hygiene and disease prevention, transforming this sacred site in yet another fashion, to wit, by severing man from vegetal and animal matter, both of which used to animate and consecrate the second holiest site in Islam. As Muslims visit Medina today in search of communion with the Prophet and oneness with God, they now navigate in a sphere of relative species solipsism and solitude, a latter-day predicament that has major implications in the greater Middle East, where the cutting of trees, the desiccation of land, and catastrophic climate change promise to shift and remake the contours of the Islamic faith for many years to come. This then brings us to our third and final thematic mooring, which is what happens in minority milieus. For decades, Islamic art historians have paid plenty of attention to royal structures located in major capital cities, stretching from Fez to Cairo, Istanbul, Medina, Tehran, and beyond. However, when we turn to exploring human religious interactions with the built environment and trees in particular, we must exit urban centers and head to more provincial and even remote settings where rural matters such as soil, plants, and trees indeed matter. Among these elements, large, curative, or unusual trees have proved a staple of community construction, especially as vertical pivots linking the earthly and sacred realms. As Amos Daphne has shown in his extensive research, rituals and ceremonies anchored to sacred trees are common to Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Bedouin, and Druze communities across the Holy Land. Such pollinations include the belief in a tree's association with a particular saint or prophet, its special blessings, miracles, or qualities, and its ability to provide shade as an arboreal canopy. Moreover, the rituals and ceremonies around trees can include rag tying, the offering of votive gifts, pilgrimage, and gathering. Last but not least, in some instances, trees provide centerpieces for rain-making ceremonies. These are known as al-istisqa, as well as centerpieces for quarrel settling or sulha, peacemaking. And at times they can help propel ecological conservation efforts among local stakeholders. A famous example of the cross-confessional status of trees in the Middle East is the famous oak of Mamre, located in Hebron. Ever since the 4th century, Abraham's oak, or Balulat Ibrahim in Arabic, has served as a sacred natural site among Christian, Muslim, and Jewish devotees, since it marks the spot where it is believed that Abraham moved his tent, met with the 3 angels of God, or partook in a feast with God who appeared to him in the form of men. And this is recorded in several parts of Genesis. This evergreen oak with immense knotted arms and roots, next to which the Russians built a wooden hut in 1886 to mark Abraham's tent, which you see right here, was protected for centuries, including thanks to the Muslim belief that whoever cut a piece of this old growth tree would in fact lose their firstborn son. Over time, the great oak nevertheless suffered. Pilgrims took twigs and branches as keepsakes, and the elements took a heavy toll, leading to it being declared officially dead in 1996. Through preservation and grafting, hope nevertheless remains that its organic life might spring anew, along with its role as a symbol of hospitality in and across the 3 Abrahamic faiths. While Abraham's oak did not have an Islamic holy building attached or surrounding it, There exist various tree shrines across the Middle East. Today, I wish to focus on 3 examples that capture a wide geographic and religious spread, beginning first with the oak tree shrine of Ibn Mashish in northern Morocco, which reifies Sufi Muslim beliefs and practices within a Berber or Amazigh mountain setting. From there, I will move westward to Zarabad in Iran to explore the so-called bleeding tree at the shrine of Ali Asghar, both of which serve as centerpieces for Shi'i Iranian mourning ceremonies. Beyond the Sufi Amazigh and Shi'i Iranian settings, my third and last example is the Yazidi shrine of Ziyarat Mirav and its wish tree located in Güven, known also as Bajin in Kurmanji Kurdish, a town located in southeastern Turkey, close to the Iraqi and Syrian borders. This latter site provides a non-Muslim example of tree shrines in the greater Middle East, a topic I explore further in my book's chapter on trees, which also includes Greek Orthodox, Druze, Alevi, and Bektashi sites as well. The tree shrine or makam of Ibn Mashish marks the peak of Mount Alam, high up in the Rif Mountains, a historically Amazigh area of northern Morocco. Abdussalam ibn Mashish, who died in 1228, was a Sufi leader or pir of the Shadhili order. He is considered the patron saint of Moroccan Sufism and is especially beloved among the Imazighen or the Berbers or the Rif. For its part, his shrine constitutes a simple whitewashed stone enclosure around a large oak, which devotees believe grew out of Ibn Mashish's chest within the tomb. So the story is that Ibn Mashish was buried here and a big oak grew out of his chest, and his shrine is this simple white building that encloses a very large oak. The mausoleum is thus no grand structure. Rather, it recalls the takka or ring of stones that encloses a solitary holy tree, while the overhanging canopy of branches provides the Sufi saint's shaded protection to his followers through a post-mortem arboreal metamorphosis of sorts, or what Greg Brida said yesterday, a saintly vegetal of sorts. Pilgrims who visit Ibn Mashish's shrine make donations and tie votive objects to the shrine's grill outlined in forest green paint. They also sit and pray around its perimeter, at times reciting the Sufi saint's only surviving text, known as As-Salawat al-Mashishiyya, or Ibn Mashish's prayers upon the Prophet Muhammad. In this short and very beautiful devotional poem, Ibn Mashish essentially describes Muhammad as the perfect universal man, al-insan al-kamil in Arabic, as well as the genesis of the entire cosmic system, the latter a Sufi notion of ontological unicity captured by the terms tawheed and wahda, both meaning a oneness of all beings, including humans, nature, the elements, and the divine spheres. Among others, his poetic verses praise Muhammad's beauty as a source of the blossoming of the so-called gardens of spiritual kingdom, or Riyad al-Malakut, a theme echoed through the miraculous bursting forth of the oak from his tree. So it's a garden of a spiritual kingdom, this tree. Other verses uttered by devotees implore God to connect them with the prophet's spiritual lineage, or nispa, the idea of a genealogy frequently analogized to a family tree and its spreading branches within Islamic and many other world cultures. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about the genealogical tree in Islam, but it's also a prominent feature as well. Furthermore, pious followers continue to invoke the divinity in their uttered prayers, asking God to drown them in the essence or spring of the ocean of unicity, the Ain Bahr al-Wahda, this expression particularly fitting for the majestic Rifian landscape. Among the Imazighen, or the Berbers, trees hold deep significance, not only as natural protectors from the sun and wind, but also as public social centers and as the source of herbal cures. For example, the oat, wok, which is known in Tamazight as tasaft in the singular or tisufa in the plural, is well known for its medicinal benefits. Its dried and crushed bark has been used as an antidiarrheal, astringent, antimicrobial, and anti-inflammatory. Its high percentile content of tannins, about 15 to 20%, in fact, especially beneficial in the treatment of gastrointestinal problems, as well as for bronchitis and arthritis. In the Middle East, such therapeutic trees are equated with the awliya, or with the Sufi saints, the two symbolically fusing as salutary pillars connecting the heavens with the earth. As Amos Daphne and others note in this regard, trees survive thanks to religious sanctions against their destruction. And this sanction is not dendolatry or tree worship per se, but rather an Islamically expressed consecration of nature. This too is the case among other Muslim faith communities, including among the Twelver Shia. Many sacred trees are therefore found within Iran, including at the shrine of Imam Hussein's son Ali al-Asghar, located in the town of Zarabad in the province of Qazvin. It's not too far from Alamut. Here, a gold dome Imamzadeh, or shrine to one of the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, marks the young boy's death at the Battle of Karbala in 680, at which time he was pierced by an arrow while being held in the arms of his father, Imam Hussein, who then was himself killed by decapitation. And this is a scene that's often shown in Iranian posters. So this is Ali Asghar being killed before Imam Hussein was himself decapitated. Their martyrdom is commemorated yearly by the Shia community during the month of Muharram, at which time participants perform processions and lamentations that weep for their violent suffering and death. The tree in Zarabad, and the tree, by the way, is right here next to the shrine of Ali Asghar, and is most likely the reason for the construction of the shrine itself is this tree. The tree in Zarabad is as important, if not more important, than the shrine itself. Known in Persian as the bloody plane tree of Zarabad, or Chinare Khunbare Zarabad, this tree is believed to gush blood every year on the morning of Ashura, the 10th day of Muharram, that marks Hussein's beheading and the massacre of his family and followers at Karbala. Moreover, some Shia believe that this monumental plane tree, a chinar, which measures 30 meters in height and 10 meters in diameter, miraculously emits a red resin that is in fact equivalent to human blood. Within a Shia worldview, human blood is not considered a sanguine and vile contaminant. Rather, it is the sap of life, consecrated and sacrificed, energizing one generation after the next. This symbolic blood transfusion animates Muharram mourning, poetry, and although largely banned nowadays, the practice of tatbir, or bloodletting, as you can see in this photograph from Bahrain in 2011. As Shia mourners chant, cry, and spill their own blood in order to partake in the redemptive suffering of the Prophet Muhammad's family, so too does the bloody plane tree of Zarabad. Though perhaps the result of canker or another fungal disease, this plasmic sap constitutes, at least from the devotee's point of view, a miraculous self-flagellation by a tree, which is, as Al-Makrizi reminds us, a most animalesque of plants, a Nabat Hayawani. In this case, it is so Hayawan, it is so animal-like that it can bleed. Like the Zarabad bleeding plain, other trees in the Middle East bespeak to a larger ethnoecology around longing and death, as expressed in architectural and arboreal terms. This concern brings us to our last example, namely a non-Muslim one. Within the Yazidi community in particular, nature and the environment are considered sacred, especially in the Lalish Valley of Iraqi Kurdistan, the location of the tomb of Sheikh Adi ibn Musafir. The Lalish shrine is the holiest site in Yazidism, which you see right here. This is the Lalish shrine to Sheikh Adi. Its surrounding valley, stippled by sacred rocks and trees, to which Yazidi pilgrims pay tribute and to which they attach votive offerings. And here is a sacred Yazidi tree in the Lalish Valley, to which many votive ribbons have been attached. The votive tree is known in Kurmanji Kurdish as a wish tree or Dara Miraza. The Dara Miraza is a feature of other Yazidi shrines, including the Ziyarat Mirav located in Güven in today's southeastern Turkey. Located close to Iraq and Syria, this small white shrine pales in size to its festooned wish tree, whose colorful gold-sprinkled fabrics flutter as if feathers of human wishes flung to the wind. And this is a short video that I took just this past fall. While much could be said about the Yazidi faith, I'd like to focus here on the concept of the wish or desire, which is often expressed through nature metaphors. For example, the tree of wishes, or Dara Miraza, symbolizes a rootedness in the soil and a hope for belonging, while a pillar of wishes, or Stuna Miraza, in the Lalish shrine promises hopes come true for those whose fingers touch in this embrace. So the Yazidi pilgrims go down to this stun, so a column or pillar in the Lalish shrine, and if they can embrace this pillar and their fingers touch, it's believed that their wishes will come true. So this is the wish pillar, or Stuna Miraza in Lalish. Additionally, the expression hill of wishes, or Gire Miraza, describes an individual who does good, helps arbitrate disputes, and even makes wishes come true. And finally, the Yazidi faithful are often described as wish desirers, or miraz khwaz, while God, the saints, leaders, rocks, and trees are said to be wish-fulfilling, or miraz bekht. Trees and nature, however, are not just the stuff of the sacred when they are caught in conflict on the ground. Indeed, whether under Saddam Hussein or ISIS, over the past few decades, the minorities of Iraq and Syria, above all the Yazidis, have struggled through both genocide and ecocide, their surrounding habitats torched, decimated, and poisoned on a mass scale. As new actors and regimes attempt a rebirth of these minority communities, along with a replanting of trees, members of the Yazidi faith and its diaspora in Turkey, Germany, and beyond continue to tie their wishes to trees in the hopes of connecting with a Godhead and to return to their homelands, a place from which they have largely been uprooted. To come full and to conclude very briefly, trees have held a prominent place in the greater Middle East for centuries, in both Muslim and non-Muslim spheres. Not only did they inspire the scriptural landscape of the Quran, stretching from its botanical cosmos from heaven to hell, but they also provided a pivot for prophecy within Muhammad's sacred mosque complex and the Palm city of Medina. In Morocco, Iran, Turkey, and elsewhere, trees have also fulfilled manifold duties, both real and symbolic. These include, in their position as spreading shade providers, vertical pillars of saintliness, homeopathic healers of those who give birth or suffer through illness, carriers of the lifeblood of their communities, and last but not least, as ribboned relics of wishes for those whose hearts ache for both life and home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christiane, for sharing your new research with us. We'll see if there's any questions from inside the room or online. If you are joining us from online, you can type it into chat. Are there any questions from in the room? Yep. Okay, so we have Betsy Athens here.
Hi, thank you for that really fantastic talk. I was, as you were talking about the date palm trees, I was wondering, I was reminded of a recent story, I think it was in 2020, of 2,000-year-old date palm seeds being planted and yielding, growing, yielding new fruit. And I was just wondering if the sort of longevity of the sort of the ability of the date palm to kind of rest and sort of be dormant for so long and then be able to blossom or bloom or grow so many years later was known historically, or if that I don't know much about this story, but like that seems like it would feed into some of the uh, theological value, I suppose, of the date palm.
That's a great question. None of the Islamic textual sources that I've seen talk about the longevity of the date palm, although palm trees can live a long time, like oak and plane trees. Most of the sources that talk about the date palm refer to its productivity and its usefulness. So it's useful as a shade provider, it's useful as a date provider, which is a major source of sustenance. In some cases, we're told that saints survived on just a few dates per day. And of course, the caloric and sugar intake of dates will keep you indeed going. In terms of its productivity, still today in various oases, like the Siwa oasis in Egypt, close to the Libyan border, the entire oasis ecosystem is based on the palm tree. So houses are made out of the trunk of the palm tree. They're also used as beams. The leaves are used for awnings and basketry. The fiber is used for rope, etc. And of course, the date itself is used as food, and the seed as an energy provider. You can burn it. So it's a total system. It's a closed kind of system of survival. And so in oasis cultures like in Siwa, the date palm tree is known as Shajara Tayyiba, the good tree, which is the same expression that's used in the Quran. And it's also very well known that the date itself is curative in a number of ways, and that you see it already in the Quran. So there isn't much about how long the palm tree can live, but besides those seeds that you mentioned that were found not too long ago in an archaeological dig in Egypt, about, I think, 2,000 or 3,000 Duma palm tree seeds were found in the tomb of King Tutankhamen, King Tut. And I think they're looking at those seeds and seeing if they can't revive, the Doom palm tree from ancient pharaonic times. So those were also considered sacred, during King Tut's time back, well before Islam. So that carried over as well from these oasis cultures, pre-Islamic into Islamic. So unfortunately, I don't have a sort of good answer to the did they know that it would last a long time, because there's a lot more on these other aspects of the date palm tree.
Thank you. And we have another question from Frida in the room.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. It was so rich. I really wish you were here. I don't say that to make you feel bad. I really don't. Selfishly.
Who is this, by the way? Because I can't see the questioners.
Oh, that's I'll be bad. Well, the camera's behind me. This is Greg Brida.
I loved your talk yesterday, and I mispronounced your name. I said Brida, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I really feel like we should get together sometime and talk, because there's so much overlap, and it's unbelievable, the parallels.
And by the way, I love your section on sacred springs and holy water, because that's another issue that I tackle. So, the tree and its relationship to water is actually really important. Yeah.
And that was one of the questions I was thinking about too. I was like, well, I wonder water, obviously, in the Islamic context, is fitting in here somewhere. And I knew you were thinking about that too. This is a question that's kind of related to the title about the animalesque and that amazing. I didn't write down the author of the quote at the beginning. It's this like proto Bruno Latour facing Gaia, like this like understanding
Mhm.
of nature versus culture at the time in like contemporary language, really explicit. Like in
Mhm.
all the texts that I work on, it's you have to kind of read between the lines, and it's so interesting to see. And then that you started with that, and then all these amazing examples, the date palm, it just goes on and on about how the symbolic and the real, or the religious, cultural, and nature are always producing each other. Like you, as soon as you think it's just nature, then it's just culture, and then it's just kind of going back and forth. Like they produce so much cultural and symbolic value, but then also real, physical, natural value too. And they're always interrelated. And just as they're only diagrammatic and abstract, well, they have to take on this relic-like quality so that we keep planting trees, or they keep appearing in Medina, like just through the 20th century. And it's amazing to see you've made this just so unbelievably rich, persuasive argument about like how they keep resisting all the meanings and symbolic meanings that we put on them, even as we continue to destroy them. And so I'm wondering, like, to what extent maybe, when you're talking about ecology, like, and materiality, I think you even said like the vital materiality of the trees at some point in the talk, like what, yeah, I don't know. There's a question here somewhere, like where is the tree, like the power of the tree, and what do we do with this? I mean, in this age of environmental crisis, like it's a terrible question. I'm sorry. It's a lot of gibberish, but my mind is just kind of thinking of Latour here.
Yeah, no, these are a lot of thoughts. So let me just sort of, dance with you rhetorically here, because your talk was very inspirational to me too. So you mentioned Latour. I mean, we think in dichotomies, and you mentioned the nature-culture dichotomy, but we also talk about the human, non-human animal dichotomy, and also animal versus, vegetal. But what's really interesting is in Islamic and Islamic thought systems, all of these are in nested circles of what is known as makhlukat, meaning the creatures, meaning that which is created, so creations. And so they're all part of creation. So there isn't that kind of a contraposition, rather it's a nested sphere of createdness. Man is not hypostatized from nature, vegetal, mineral, even though there are separate categories. And he's not necessarily posited as superior. He has accountability because he has to act as a custodian, but he's also makhlukat. He's a creation, just like animal, just like trees. So man has to keep himself in check within the system of the creaturely world, in that assemblage, which is, rhizomatic, if we're going to talk about, Latour and others. So it's a self-reinforcing system, right? The tree produces religion also produces the tree. So there's that back and forth. And some of the things you say make me think a lot about the blind spots that we've had in the study of Islam. And the one that has bothered me the most as I've been thinking through that is that we've defined Islam as contra-paganism, right? There was a period of so-called ignorance, the Jahiliyyah, before Islam in the Arabian Peninsula, a moment of idolatry and many pagan deities, and therefore Islam has to be against nature, against paganism. But when we set up that kind of equation, what we forget is that Islam has never been divorced from nature, and has drawn a lot of its power as a monotheistic faith from its ecological foundations. And we need to actually bring nature back into the Islamic equation. And that means looking at the Kaaba as a reliquary for sacred rock, looking at the Kaaba as a reliquary for the Zamzam well, right, for sacred water. Looking at Medina as a courtyard for sacred palm trees, looking at the Dome of the Rock as a reliquary for sacred rock. So we actually have to really resist that urge to define Islam as contra-paganism, meaning against nature. And if we actually engage in that reconstructive, I would say conceptual methodology, we can actually change the trajectory of vibrant matter going forth. because we can then transform scholarship into action. And that means actually working with partners who design mosques or who engage in preservation work and say, listen, if you want to restitute it to what you perceive as something original or something that is in tune with the foundations, then you actually have to not clear trees, but you have to clear cement and make way for more trees. And that's not being postmodern and, you know, thinking about the future, though it is future oriented, but it's also about going back in time. So we've never been as modern as those, you know, who came before us. So I think that's actually fighting against the false promises of developmentalism as well. So it's, you know, thinking about a green deen or a green faith or Muslim environmentalism or what have you, but we can actually determine all sorts of strategies by simply looking at historical tradition, which have a lot, many lessons to teach us if we're open to them.
Slip in one quick question and then we will move on to the next speaker. It's related to Greg's. Students of Islamic art often ask how trees can be represented in sacred contexts when living beings otherwise are omitted. So I wanted to ask what you think in this concept of animalesque. Do you see evidence of an idea of having like a living breath, or is there any related criticism of representation of trees? I mean, just something that comes to mind immediately, the giant trees in the Great Mosque of Damascus. I imagine there wouldn't be documents for that early, but I just wonder how you characterize this animalesque nature of trees in that larger, what's often called, the image debate, right? And the representation of human beings in Islam.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Trees are, of course, depicted very widely. And though we tend to assign aniconism to Islamic cultures, there are, of course, plenty of depictions of humans. And I think I may have some examples here. I thought maybe there might be some questions related to that. And they need not be posited against one another, human versus vegetal. And in fact, we could look at them in synchronicity. So one example, that has to be tackled also in my book chapter is the so-called wak tree at the end of the world. And it's a tree that goes wak that actually speaks because it has leaves or fruits that are human and animal. So this is the real sort of animalesque tree, the wak tree. So that's the real intermediary or in between vegetal and human, and there are plenty of illustrations of the wak tree. And one other thing I did want to mention, and I didn't have time, is the story of Zacharias, right? He's the father of John the Baptist and the guardian of Mary. And within the Islamic stories of the prophets, the prophet Zachariah is fleeing his tormentors, and miraculously to hide him, a tree opens up and absorbs Zachariah. But unfortunately, one little part of his robe was sticking out from the tree, so his pursuers could identify him. And so they decided to slice the tree. And the moral of the story there is, in killing prophethood, you also kill a tree. And the tree, just like a human, can bleed, and in this case, bleeds saintly halos, so that the light of divinity is mixing with the blood of humanity, and the person becomes a tree and the tree becomes a person, and both of them can perish when they're persecuted. So to me, it's very interesting to see actually not human versus tree, but how human tree or the animalesque plant come together in these really interesting symbiotic relationships. So I hope this kind of answers your question.
Thank you again very much, Christiane, for that very stimulating and excellent talk. We are going to move on to our second speaker, who's joining us from Indonesia.